Morning, everyone. Good morning, Lauren, and good morning, Jeremy. So this morning we're joined by Jeremy Soden from Forward Access,
G'day.
who's a assessor. Is that right? A SDA assessor.
Yep, SDA Assessor and Access Consultant, and also a building surveyor, but don't do too much good old building surveying these days, more access consulting and SDA assessing.
Perfect. So look, the reason Lauren's invited Jeremy on this morning is there's some changes in the way the NDIA wants to assess SDA construction, and we thought it would be timely to sort of have an expert come on and have a chat about that and some implications across the market, what it might look like for investors, for construction, for timelines, for risk. So again, I won't steal of any of Jeremy's thunder. Lauren, is there anything you want to recap before we let the expert say something intelligent, not us just bang on too much?
What are you trying to say? No, absolutely. And I'm really, really pleased to have you, Jeremy. We always have some really good catch ups and sort of industry crossover. I think it's nice to see some really, really great assessors in the space that are consistently delivering, SDA advice to the industry. And this was really about tying all of that together so that we know you're at the front end of the market in terms of pre-certification of builds that are
Yeah,
sort of in planning, and we're at the end where they're being certified and we're finding tenants. So it's a really nice conversation to just sort of understand, okay, what's happening at your end that is going to have an impact in the market, in 6 to 12 months' time when these builds are finished.
yeah,
So I'm really excited to have you, and well, let's get stuck into it and see what's happening at your end.
yeah, cool. Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, an SDA assessor, we get the plans to approve before it begins construction, and then it takes a while for it to get all the way to your end for the final enrollment and the SDA completed. So
Yeah,
it is good to get the crossover and sort of understand what's happening on both ends and what's happening on the front lines and the approval processes and things like that, because that literally
yeah,
influences the enrollment and the building type and the funding and all of that
that's
kind of good stuff. So it is
yeah,
good to get that crossover and understanding of what's happening in the
yeah,
broader sense, because we typically, like, we don't actually require any crossover with an SDA assessor and an SDA provider. All we need at the very end is a letter from you to say, the density of this project complies, the SDA density. That's pretty
yeah,
much the only crossover that's mandatory. Otherwise, would never even have to talk. But
yeah, which is crazy.
I know that's why it's extremely good to get the crossover and know what's happening as a broader industry. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Lauren and I, Jeremy, have had many conversations on air and off air about some of the crap SDA properties that get pushed out there.
yeah,
And when I hear things like guys like you don't actually need to engage with SDA providers, only to say yes, it technically meets the the guidelines technically.
yeah,
It shines a bit of light onto how a lot of these marketing groups have been able to build all this crap and keep selling it.
yeah,
Mm.
definitely. And yeah, robust group homes are your classic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
classic.
Um, there's, but yeah, not just that, but yeah, yeah, 4 bedroom homes as well.
Yeah.
Um, one bedroom homes that are being marketed as houses and things like that, but technically a 1 bedroom would receive villa funding, all this
Yeah.
type of stuff. Yeah, that is, it's gobbledygook to the standard mum and dad investor and things like that. And it's
Yeah.
only people like you and I and really in the depths of the industry and the definitions and the funding models and things like that that actually understand what's going on and can cut
Yeah.
through the crap really.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's a good point that yeah, marketing and marketers can push a pretty bad product and a pretty
They're
bad
exploiting they're
outcome.
exploiting loopholes in the system, right? So all of us sitting on this conversation would go, it would be better if there was more engagement required. It'd be better if
Yeah,
there was more input from all stakeholders. It'd be better if all
yeah,
these reasons, right? Um, and some of the product being sold out there, they're exploiting the reasons. They're exploiting the lack of that consultation
yeah,
to put forward a product that's not
Mm.
great. But look,
yeah,
and so
Yeah.
one of the reasons we got you here today is we keep hearing about changes coming through from the department down. So
Yep.
what are you? So why don't you describe it for us? So I don't want to ham fist
Yeah,
it.
cool.
What are the
Yeah.
changes that are coming down?
There's two things to touch on. Is that I'll touch on the building class side just very briefly first, because that could be hours and hours of discussion on its own. So I'll give a very brief summary of the building class side of things.
Sure.
That in just at the beginning of this year, there was a court case in New South Wales, and essentially a high physical support SDA, essentially the government or Department of Fair Trading, and the building regulator in New South Wales deemed that an SDA is essentially a Class 3 building. Specifically, an SDA high physical support building is a Class 3 residential care building. And that's what the building regulator in New South Wales found in a court of law. So,
Okay.
in a court. And a building certifier lost their license over it because they issued what was deemed an incorrect building classification and an unlawful approval from the building approval side of things. So that had a massive impact in New South Wales, an enormous impact in New South Wales. It's had a bit of ripple effects across Australia, but mainly throughout New South. And what that means was that a lot of investors are very wary of building SDA in New South Wales, and any product that they were previously getting approved, through a Class 1A or Class 1B or a Class 3 that wasn't specifically a residential care building. What a residential care building essentially means is a lot more money. The building and approval costs will require significantly more. So that sort of spooked, and pretty rightly so, a lot of people constructing SDA in New South Wales.
For the uninitiated, Jeremy, can you, in the 50 words or less version, what's the difference between 1A, 1B, and Class 3 and 3B?
Yep. 1A, 1 and 1B are more of a residential building. So it's more like a stock standard house, really. Well, that's what a Class 1A is, a stock standard house. Class 1B, and a Class 1B is typically a rooming accommodation building, which is typically a house just a bit more intense, and the building occupants may not know each other, and it'll have a bit more fire safety requirements, but still a residential building.
Like a co-living house that are popping up.
Yep, pretty much. Yep, exactly.
Four or five apartments in one house, that'll be one.
Yep. And then for class, it could also be a Class 3 though, depending on the certification. So then the Class 3 side of things is a commercial building, like a full-blown commercial building. You need a commercial builder's license, commercial building insurance, everything commercial, and it'll have a lot higher fire safety requirements and fire safety features. And more stricter planning requirements and all those kinds of things. And typically consultants will be charging a lot more for a Class 3 in comparison to a Class 1A.
It's essentially like an aged care. Well, I think the original building certification for Class 3 was residential aged care. It fits that.
Similar to that, yeah.
So it's that, next level.
Okay. So it could be an enormous building. So it's not. Sometimes they're not comparable to, if you're doing a 2-bedroom house and someone's calling it a residential care building, it may not really fit that mold, but there's less flexibility that some certifiers, will impose the harsher requirements.
Okay.
So in New South Wales, there's now case law that says HPS homes are a 3B. Right,
residential care building. Yeah, it's a classification under building Class 3. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then what other changes are coming down from the agency, from the NDIA, NDIS?
So the agency themselves aren't touching on the building class as much. It's a bit more out of their depth, the building class side of things. So they receive advice from the Australian Building Codes Board on that kind of stuff. But they've kind of said that they don't really use the building class side of things. They use their own sets of definitions
Yeah.
from the SDA rules and their acts. So they don't really touch on building class. Their changes that they've sort of come into play, it's not as much changes, in fact, that they're sort of trying to clarify interpretations. So they've recently, in October, had a meeting with all SDA assessors. This was the home and living branch at the NDIA. That's essentially SDA. That's who administers SDA, the home and living branch at NDIA.
Yeah.
And they all had a meeting with us, SDA assessors, all the SDA assessors in Australia, and went through a bunch of sort of interpretations that they were clarifying, and sort of wanted to set out what they foresee the industry looking like and how it's proceeding moving forward. So what sort of came a highlight out of that? Well, they didn't really give much definitive information, unfortunately. They
What?
The government department not being clear about what they're trying to do. What, really? No, come on.
Some of it was good, but overall, it wasn't enormously helpful for SDA assessors. There was some good points of clarification in there, but there were some really pertinent things that we really wanted to know that they couldn't answer, such as what's happening with improved livability. They literally said the government doesn't have a position on it, so we don't have a position on it.
Wow.
So that wasn't that helpful. What sort of they did say to the context of that is that the NDIS review needs to be sorted, because that had a couple of recommendations regarding SDA, and there was one recommendation regarding improved livability, and sort of changing improved livability to a different category that's more of a fit for purpose category. But they didn't touch on that. But all they said was there has to be a government position and a determination from the government before they can even advise what's happening with improved livability, and that hasn't occurred yet. And the other thing was, when's the new SDA design standard coming out? Because they flagged that there was a new design standard coming out in 2023. It's now November 2024, and they still don't have an answer of when that's coming out, because they need to sort out improved livability first. They essentially can't release a new design standard because they don't know what's happening with improved livability yet.
And we know the NDIS timelines always change, and we never expect them to actually deliver on things when they say they will the first time. It's usually the third or fourth time, the rescheduled dates. So I think in my mind I had the next design standards review was due out in December this year, which probably means July next year. Is that roughly what you're estimating?
I'm not so sure to be that soon. So they said that they're going to go through a consultation process first to try and consult all stakeholders in the SDA process to get, and especially SDA assessors, to get feedback into the new SDA design standard that's going to be released eventually. But yeah, so that consultation process hasn't began yet.
Yeah, so we're probably December 25 at the earliest.
Yeah, I wouldn't even put a date on it.
Oh, we love a magic 8 ball. We really do. And it's just speculation. So,
you know. But I mean, it just trying to get inside the mind of government sometimes. It's trying to pick lotto numbers. You've got that much as well. Yeah.
I would hope this time next year, though. So if I was to put a very rough date on it, I'd say there'd be something in the works that would have some idea this time next year about a new SDA design standard. And they sort of didn't really touch on what they expect to change either. There's a few things regarding, shared driveways and access from the boundary and those kinds of things that they've flagged, but nothing substantial or concrete they've actually flagged. Hey, this will change.
So what's all this doing for sentiment and confidence, and what's happening now in the market regarding all of these questions? And are you seeing work drop off, or are you seeing it pick up? What's the impact on the daily?
Personally, hasn't changed too much for me. I'm based in Queensland, based in Brisbane. Queensland market, it's probably as strong as it's ever been. Maybe that is because anecdotally, I've heard that New South Wales, there has been an enormous downturn in SDA
Mm.
in New
Mm.
South Wales because of all the court case and the requirements and things in New South Wales and the costs and the funding. So
Yeah.
I have heard, don't do much in New South Wales at all, but have heard that there is a massive downturn in SDA in New South Wales. It could be the fact that New South Wales investors have come to Queensland, and that's maybe why Queensland seems to be pretty unaffected.
Yeah. Might be a
So
bit of a
maybe there's been a drop off in total, and a bit of it's been pushed towards Queensland.
Do you do much in
So
Victoria? Have you got much exposure in that market?
no, not too much. Only really larger developments. I do every type of development in Queensland, and just mainly larger developments outside of Queensland. And yeah, so like apartments probably aren't as much affected because everyone knows what an apartment is and how it's funded and everything like that. It's mainly just the house type buildings.
And can I ask you a question? And this was sort of spurred on from a couple of discussions we had, and we were trying to understand. Okay, this NDIS consultation that happened in October, it seems to have got a couple of investors worried. And the worry was that the NDIS seemed to suggest that they're not going to confirm the building type until a tenant moves in. And it took that certainty away. And I sort of thought, oh, this is an interesting internal NDIS process. So have you got any information on that?
Yeah, I do. So that hasn't changed. It's always been the process, which is absolutely crazy to me. So as an SDA assessor, we actually have to write the building type on our assessment summary form. So that's the first thing, that people in the design process are relying a lot on SDA assessors and what we're interpreting the building type to be. But the NDIA have released this media statement to say that they are the governing body. They determine what the building type is, and it doesn't matter what's listed on our forms. And we are unable to get advice until we're literally lodging our assessment approval. So we're ready to approve it. We're issuing our approval documentation to the SDA enrollments team at the NDIA. They said that's when they will provide feedback on the building type. So it's too far down the line.
Is that changed?
That's how it's always been. So it's more the fact that it's more coming to light that people are unable to rely on exactly the building type that we put on our form, because the NDIA at the very end may say, "Oh, we don't think it's that."
How often would the NDIA disagree with
I've had
your
one.
assessment?
So I might be one of the lucky ones, but I have one that had came back and they thought it was a villa and not a house. And I don't actually know how many I've done to date, but it'd be, I don't know, 600 or 700 or something like that. And I've had one come back and they've called it a villa instead of a house. And that was due to a shared driveway, that they deemed it to be a shared driveway. So they wouldn't determine it to be a house. They said it must be a villa, because there were 5 allotments which all had individual titles, individual land parcels, individual houses, all fenced off, hedges, all individual entries, all that kind of stuff. And the driveway was on a different title, but they were on a group. They're all on a group title, but they had individual allotments, individual titles, but they were all listed on a group title. And so they deemed them to be villas. I don't actually know what the result of that was. I believe the provider still went ahead with the enrolment as houses, and I haven't heard back since. So hopefully I'll follow that up, but hopefully they've determined during that, that what they say is it'll be determined by the delegate that assesses the enrolment. So that's done at the very end. That's done at your enrolment. You enroll the thing ready for people to move in, and then they go, "Oh, we think this is we're only going to fund this as a villa, not a house."
But look, as far as market confidence goes, I mean, so you've done 600-700 of these things. You've had one that's been challenged, and it sounds like the provider went
It
ahead.
might have even been approved. Yeah, so the provider can provide evidence and have the argument at the enrollment process.
So I suppose what we're trying to get to here is there a change coming out through the agency that will impact? You know, we're in Queensland, but this podcast goes all over. It sounds like New South Wales got some different things happening, but is there a change? And it sounds like there's no change. There's just a clarification on the NDIA being able to turn off or disagree with an assessment from an assessor like yourself. So it sounds like there's no change. And the instances, I suppose if you're doing a good job as an assessor and you're following the guidelines and you're not being cheeky or pushing the boundaries and you do a reasonable assessment, it sounds like 99.8% of the time it goes through without a problem.
Yeah, correct. And that's what I think as well. And in sort of the pushing the boundaries kind of thing and not operating in the grey areas. And I feel like it's a part of our job as SDA assessors to actually put on our NDIA hat and say, what are the NDIA going to interpret this building to be? And all SDA assessors out there may want to take a bit more conservative view and not try and push the boundaries and say, oh yeah, I think we can get away with this, or we could possibly do this. Try and put your NDIA hat on and take a conservative approach and don't risk that at the very end of the project that they're going to make a split decision. It could be this, could be that. So I think it's a part of the SDA assessor. Well, it's actually not a part of the SDA assessor's job, but I think it is forming a part of the SDA assessor's job in the market right now to try and form a view at the design stage of how the NDIA are going to interpret and enroll this building. And that needs to be a part of the design process. And sometimes it's not, and people they're just doing this blindly or pushing the boundaries and going, well, we'll just try and get it through at the end. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars difference in funding.
Absolutely.
Jeremy, great advice. If you're an SDA assessor, put your NDIA hat on and how are they going to interpret it and protect your clients from some heartaches down the line. Listen, guys, that's about 20 minutes plus. I think that's great. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. We'd like to get you back on sometime and keep talking about this kind of thing because it's really important. If an investor's watching this and they're not quite sure about how it all works, this kind of information is priceless. It's just priceless. So thank you for your generosity in coming on to share that. I think the takeaway for me for this episode is nothing's fundamentally changed, and you want to work with a fairly level-headed team who aren't trying to push boundaries, but just working within the guidelines and looking at it from all perspectives. You need to look at it from a financial perspective, from the participant's perspective, and importantly, something we haven't touched on much, Lauren, is from the agency's perspective. They've got a set of rules they've got to follow. So we've got to look at it from all perspectives.
Yeah. May I just add in there? I think it's really important to note that if you're going through this process and you feel like you're not 100% satisfied with your assessor's pre-certification, you don't know whether they've considered all these things, either ask them or get a second opinion. Like you've got all the opportunity to do that due diligence then to make sure that you have got the best chance of that going through as planned. And if that's going to save you hundreds of thousands of dollars of redoing driveways to 5 villas or townhouses in the future, then it's well worth the fee. And thanks so much, Jeremy, for jumping on. It's always good to catch up. And like I said, bring that conversation full circle. Yeah.
It's always good to know what everyone else is doing, and from people. Investors' perspective, particularly, to know what's going on at the very early stages and what's happening during the design stage, because that forms the foundations for the whole project.
Yeah, it really does.
All right, thank you, guys. We'll stop it there and we'll chat next time.
Okay.
So easy. Thanks for having me on. Cheers.